Welcome, welcome to Women on the Week. I am Meredith Jacobs, CEO of Jewish Women International. I'd like to introduce my panelists for this week, and then we're going to get right into it because there's a lot to talk about. I'm joined this week by Helen Chernikoff, news editor for The Forward, and Felissa Kramer, editor-in-chief of JTA. And our very special guest is Susie Turnbull, who I know from JWI as one of our women to watch, but also a former chair of our board of trustees. But everyone else in the world knows Susie, and the reason we invited her here today is for her 35 years of community activism through both political and philanthropic efforts. We were just talking about Maryland because in 2018, Susie was the Democratic nominee for Maryland's lieutenant governor. She has been the former National Democratic Party leader, serving as vice chair and deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, chair of the DNC Women's Leadership Forum and Women's Caucus, and she currently serves on the board of Integrity First for America. So I do want you to talk a little bit about IFA's work, especially as we get into how anti-Semitism has been playing into this election. So normally we spend half of our time talking about the news of the week and half of the time doing a deep dive. We were just saying, I feel like the news of the week is all about the upcoming election. So why don't we just focus our half hour on this? But Felissa, I believe that you wrote an article this week reporting Stephen Miller's plans for immigration should Trump get a second term. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
The
And then
Guardian wrote the
how
article,
QAnon
right?
is kind of playing into it.
Yeah, the Guardian reported that Stephen Miller is not waiting to find out the election results. He has, according to their reporting, has a drawer. I think they called it a drawer full of executive orders that a second term Trump could issue around immigration. And there are things that you would expect, knowing Stephen Miller's approach to immigration in the US includes, eliminating birthright citizenship, zeroing out refugee admissions. Already, the plan for next year is the lowest number of refugee admissions in all of the history of the refugee program in the US. So I think this report just goes to show like how high stakes this election really is, right? Like this matters. It matters for lots of reasons. Certainly, the refugee admissions issue, particularly within the Jewish world, is almost bipartisan. It's not bipartisan because everything is polarized, but it's as close as you get, I think. And so that's something that, one of many things that could go in dramatically different directions depending on the outcome of next week's election.
Although even if Biden were to win next week, can Trump implement some of these plans in a lame
They require implementation.
or
They require implementation. They require apparatus and people. No, he won't. So I think Biden has said, he'll form a task force to reunite children and families that were separated. He will raise the refugee admissions cap to 125,000, which is, I think, higher than it was at its peak, which at a time when the world is in turmoil, like that's, whatever, that's a pretty significant, like meaningful distinction. And so this is really, I think, set by executive order, executive prerogative. So I don't think we're going to see any big policy changes of the big like policy changing thing. When did it happen? Monday? That happened already, right? With the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. Right. Now I think nothing can change between now and Tuesday in terms of the future of the policy in the country.
I'd like to talk about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I have to tell you that I think one of the key pushes in the Jewish community to vote for Joe Biden is the issue about immigration. And I think it started, if you look back, in 2018, when it became known of the numbers of children who are being separated from their parents, I can't I can't even explain what, as a mother, as a grandmother, what that felt like. And when I talk about my campaign in 2018, my most inspiring moment was, and I said this last night when we were talking about the surge with JWI, was standing on an overpass of I-95 between Washington and Baltimore with people who were protesting the child separation. And every time a truck would go by and wave at our signs, our protest signs, the bridge, the overpass would shake. And it was a moment where you saw, yeah, people are really concerned about this. This is a big deal. We have to do something about this. And the numbers with women, the numbers with suburban women, the numbers just of the Jewish community altogether are there, partly because of that, because of the Muslim ban in the beginning of Trump's term, and because of these social justice issues.
So interesting. Helen, I know you did a look at kind of historical numbers, but go ahead.
Well, actually, I have a question for Susan. I read something really fascinating today that in the Post that I was so interested in that I called my son over, who's 13, and had him read the story with me and watch the video of this new ad that I'm sure you've also seen that the Biden campaign is running in swing states. It's so powerful. It's so morally strong and clear about this issue. It really zeroes in on the children who are separated from their parents right now, and the parents can't be located. And I just want to know why only now are they running that kind of ad? Because it really did my heart glad to see it. Also because it just seemed like the Democrats pushing back on an issue that Republicans have really owned and pushing back skillfully. But why only in the last days?
You see, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, people don't pay attention to anything. Miles Taylor, who is the anonymous, came out this week. That was part of this week's news. And one of the things he said, and the same thing that Bob Woodward said last month, which was people don't pay attention. People don't clue into how the election is going until the end. And so I think we've seen a series of this. I don't think that the Democrats ever let up on that issue, but I do believe that the more recent knowledge of what went on behind the scenes in the discussions about separating children, the 545 children who will never see their parents again. Let's be realistic here. And then Joe Biden brought it up repeatedly in the debates. And so it is amplification of the debates. That ad that you're talking about, the ad about, there's another ad that ripped me apart this week, which was two daughters on the phone with their mother via Facebook, with actually just talking to the nurse in the hospital over COVID. Mm-hmm. These are issues that are so they strike an emotional chord, and you don't know when it's going to affect people. But for me, I sat there. I mean, I'm obviously right there with them. I lost both of my parents, and I didn't get to say goodbye. Not through COVID, but it was 36 or 37 and 27 years ago, and still that ad going, oh gosh, realizing, of course, they're actors in this ad. And I think that there's things like that. This is an election that is in our guts and in our heart, I think, more than in our mind.
I think that's probably, I mean, I'm not a political strategist, but I think, we understand that at this stage of the game, the big question is turnout. And, for there may be folks who are, they thought it over, they probably know where, but like what's going to really get them to go wait in those lines they've been seeing on TV is maybe a punch in the gut. So I don't know if that's the theory.
And that's why the numbers are so great. I mean, in Texas today, they announced that there have been more people who have voted early than voted in the entire election in 2016 in Texas. That is huge. The numbers are astronomical.
How much is the strategy changing? Because I agree with you, Felissa, a lot of this, I had noticed I don't remember if it was on TV or on the internet that I saw an ad for Biden that was so hopeful and uplifting and not talking about, Trump or whatever, but more of this positive vision for what life would be like in a Biden administration. And I thought, this is a smart strategy. This is now this is the messaging that I could imagine that they very thoughtfully put into place. There was a strategy behind it with, we're going to end on this message. How much is that changing because of all this early voting? How many people are left to go stand in those lines? What are they rethinking that wouldn't have been done in previous, elections because of COVID and because of the early votes?
Well, I know that the campaign obviously is viewing the election as early vote by mail and the election. I mean, there's an election day.
Right, where November 3rd is the last day to vote.
It's never just election day anymore. So that's number one. And you want your final closing to be uplifting or emotional. And the difference between what the closings are is night and day. We're having someone who is saying that the end of COVID is, we're just turning the corner. Well, we've been hearing that. We've been hearing that. We're not turning the corner. The number yesterday was the highest ever.
Or that it's a lie, that it's a fabrication.
Yes,
and November 4th, you're going to stop hearing about.
That are just ridiculous and wrong. And we're all, so the contrast is so great. The contrast here is, I'm in this for you. I'm going to get you together with your family. We're going to work on this. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to work on this, versus it's his fault. It's her fault. It's her fault. She's a monster. She's a this, she's a that, Savannah Guthrie was mean. Leslie Stahl was mean. For that to be the end of it is just crazy.
Can I raise I think is an interesting point. We ran an article a week ago about ads in Florida, highlighting 2 ads in particular. And we noted in that piece that, Trump is very negative, as you just described, but it's so interesting that he actually has a very positive appeal to make on Israel to people who, care about that so much that it's, it's at the top of their list of issues that they vote on. I have some family in Florida who are just exactly like this. And it's so kind of in such contradistinction to his general MO and really who he seems to be. But it's just interesting that exists and that he can run these sort of positive ads. Like, I did these things. You really care about this. Vote for me. I said to my mother, well, it makes sense actually that my family, I won't name names, would vote on that. I mean, what my cousin's brother made Aliyah back in the 60s. And so part of the family is there. They're very, very, very concerned and adore Israel. And so I was kind of like, actually, it's not so crazy.
It's sort of interesting. I have a niece in Israel, and who made Aliyah more than 15 years ago, and I do not know a single family member of mine and what strong Israel supporters
Yeah.
who is voting for Donald Trump. And
Well,
I think that fits with the whole notion of that there is a limited number of people where that issue is going to work.
yeah.
And that's why the AJC poll that came out last week shows a completely different story than, or a much more positive story than the article, a week, this week, with a 67%, and that Trump is gaining in the Jewish community.
What's interesting also, I have a friend who was making calls, and she spoke to someone in Florida, not Jewish. And this woman said, what has Trump actually done? So he moved the embassy in Jerusalem. She said, who cares? That's not my country. What has he really done? And that was interesting too. So Helen, like you were saying, there is a finite group that's being targeted. I think those Jews, but also the evangelicals. But how many people are like, so what? So what?
Well, but Florida, and we've had to run so many pieces on this. It really can come down to these small numbers, and it's not just Jews. I was really glad to quote a political scientist on this. It's Vietnamese and other small groups in Florida who can kind of swing the balance, but it's so tight. This is for Republican Jewish operatives. This is the game. Is getting.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I was in Florida in 2004 and in 2008 on behalf of the Democratic Party. In 2004, I was there with Mandy Patinkin and Carole King and Larry David and a number of members of Congress. And I spent 10 days in Florida. And it is, there are obviously splits in Florida in the Jewish community. In 2008, there were those who really didn't like Hillary. I mean, who were still mad or thought or actually couldn't vote for Obama. They just couldn't vote for Obama, which I felt very strongly about, obviously. The organized Jewish Democratic apparatus is spending huge amount of time on phone banking and texting and all sorts of ads and everything that you could throw at Florida, they're throwing it. It will be thrown at Florida because of that. But it's also the case, as you pointed, there's Vietnamese and even the dialects that are important and the flags. This is something I remember from 2008, that there are so many different countries represented by the Latinx community, that you have, Argentina, Brazilian, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, all these South American flags, and they would do these ads and they would change the flag behind the person speaking, which gives you that state is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the Latinx community, all of those different diasporas, there's not just one monolith. It's
right. And we don't know
Cuban,
yet.
Guatemalan, and it's all a different messaging and priorities and people. You can't.
And we won't know for a while what the impact will be of all the Puerto Ricans who moved from Puerto Rico to Florida, because when the aid that comes is a roll of paper towels, that's not really a winning message in the community.
And only if you catch the paper towels. So
right. Right.
Is the idea that if Florida comes in early enough,
it's over.
It's over?
It's over, because it basically, the path there for Trump, he is on defense everywhere. He's on defense everywhere. And if he doesn't win Florida, that'll be out early enough in the evening, and it's a key indicator that he's in trouble.
How much does Pete Buttigieg's appearance on Fox News, which are getting such, tremendous accolades, how much is that moving the needle? How important are those conversations? Are they breaking through it all? We talk about those bubbles. Does something like being interviewed on Fox News break the bubble at all, or is it just they've done too good?
I think it's great. I don't know how others would feel about this, but I think the race, and having run for lieutenant governor on a ticket, I can tell you, the race is between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That is why today, Joe Biden is going to be in Iowa and Minnesota and Michigan, I think Michigan, and Kamala Harris is going to be in Texas instead of the switch. Because what the Democrats need to do is make sure that he's locked down Wisconsin, Michigan, and as soon as possible, but also sort of have Trump have to spend some money and some more effort in Texas, because Texas would be icing on the cake.
So take us behind the scenes, Susie. What's going on right now in the campaign? Something that we wouldn't know that they're doing. What do they know? How accurate are their polling numbers? What do they know? What are they doing? What are they feeling? What's the last couple of days like?
The last couple of days of a campaign are, you have everything that you've done until now is like ready for today in the next few days. So the last week was getting people to vote, an early vote. And if they weren't going to vote, and if they've already voted, getting them to volunteer. The message on every texting campaign and every calling campaign was, great, you voted. Now, will you talk to 3 more people and get them to vote? Or did you vote by, if you're going to vote by mail, don't vote by mail, put it in a Dropbox. Or you can take it to your early vote location. Personally today, I've already texted 750 people in North Carolina and in Wisconsin. And each state has its own deal going on. In Wisconsin, and I don't live in either of those states. In Wisconsin, I'm texting about an event tomorrow night that's a Halloween party with the cast of Rocky Horror Show with Tim Curry and some others from the Rocky Horror Show at late Saturday night. And it's a fundraiser. So that pays for food at the polls. It pays for water. And when people are standing in line, it pays for another ad maybe, or another staffer for 2 days. North Carolina, we're reaching out, and the message is just, do you have a plan? What time are you going? Take 2 people with you. And if you have any free time, can you help us call or text people? The other thing that is happening right now is it's really the candidate's time is the most important asset. And Joe Biden is probably on local radio or local television across the country in those targeted states. The difference between 2016 and 2020 is that obviously we have a pandemic, and so it's all virtual and stuff like that. But it allows people who didn't necessarily volunteer last time to get out there, because I'm sitting on my couch. and I could do it all day long, and I don't have to put on shoes. It's like that. And But it is also the case that people have PTSD from 4 years ago. And I said to my husband earlier today, I remember I was doing radio at the DNC. I was booking surrogates on radio at the DNC the last month and at the Democratic Convention in 2016. And the former mayor of Detroit, Dennis Archer, kept calling me and saying, "You need them here. She needs to come here. She needs to come here." And he was like in panic mode, as was Debbie Dingell, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who were saying, "You got to get people here. You got to put them on." And Dennis Archer literally stood next to a TV camera all day long in Detroit with a reporter to go on every 10 minutes because they felt it. People aren't feeling that kind of angst this time. And they're spreading all of these surrogates out, and no state is going to say, "Well, if you would have come to me, I would have made it different. It would have been different." Wisconsin felt that way. Michigan felt that way last time for sure.
Interesting. And I just want to note that we just had a comment from Robin Gottlieb, who's watching, who said, in addition, we were talking about how diverse the Latinx communities are, that the same exists within the Jewish community. And she was talking about Russian or Jews from Arab communities. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. I also kind of want to put Felissa and Helen on the spot. This wasn't something we talked about earlier, but this morning, Aaron Dorfman from the Littman Camphor Foundation was talking about, they've been doing a big campaign on free and fair elections, encouraging Jewish organizations to not only close their doors so that their employees could have time to go vote, but encourage their staff to go volunteer at the polls, help if they want to help on a campaign, but just be active and engaged. But now they're shifting to talking about peaceful transition of power. And the question was, what is the voice of the religious community, the faith-based community, the Jewish community specifically, in ensuring and talking about a peaceful transition of power, or talking about democracy in general? So I'm just wondering if you're thinking about what kind of coverage you're going to be doing after November 3rd.
You ask a lot of us. Come on. Come on. I mean, this is the moment. It's like, I'm sure, Helen, you guys are having the conversation too. Like, what do we need to do as journalists right now? Like, right now, it's really about, the train is in motion and we need to see where it winds up. I do think that we are hearing from Jewish groups across the spectrum kind of laying the groundwork for, it's been an incredibly polarized moment Jewishly. And there are some communities that are highly activated right now. And I'm thinking about, the Orthodox Jewish communities in Brooklyn and New Jersey that have really, I wasn't on this before years ago or in the past, so I don't know, but it's notable to me how, not just that they're voting for Trump, but that they're showing up for him. And I think that I can see kind of tea leaves around, whatever happens, the level of the energy level is going to need to change, or the way it's being directed is going to need to change after the election. And what is it that we need to do as a community to, no matter what the outcome is, try to come together, try to, heal or not exacerbate these divisions that are really deep and wide. So I think we're starting to hear some of that, but I think mostly everyone's kind of holding their breath now.
Yeah, I think that's true. I have our politics reporter who is new to the staff has been picking up on some of this stuff and, is collecting it. And we're kind of thinking it's like very hard to craft a story yet because we don't know what's going to happen. And I kind of feel like some of this, this talk about the peaceful transition coming from Jewish groups, it kind of assumes that Biden's going to win. And that's because there is this different feeling now, but I do have that PTSD so much, and we don't know if he's going to win. And I mean, there are other possible scenarios. I mean, say Trump wins, with a reasonable margin. Well, there could be resistance of, on the other side. And I'm not talking about like, fine people on both sides, but it's not a crazy idea that there would be resistance in the streets if or protests in the streets if Trump were to win, you know. So it's hard to get our heads around it.
And then, so those are two of the three scenarios. And the third scenario is that there isn't a resolution in a quick amount of time, and that it's close enough that litigation makes sense. And like, that's a real thing that we're facing. And I will just say, in 2016, my husband was working as a pulpit rabbi, and he hadn't really thought through, that was his first time in the pulpit for a high stakes election like this, hadn't really thought through like what his community would need. And I think he played a really powerful role. Like, people who didn't come to shul like they needed help making sense of their world. And certainly one outcome here will be very alarming to the vast majority of American Jews. Another outcome will be very alarming to a minority of Jews who feel equally so that it's just as high stakes. And then the third outcome of lack of resolution is going to be alarming to everybody. And I think that there is a role for Jewish community here to help people through this time, but we don't know what it is.
And I think I know that I'm the former chair of JCPA and still serve on their board. And JCPA is working with the Jewish Community Relations Councils across the country, talking exactly about what happens because of exactly what you said. There are going to be people on both sides of this, but nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going to happen, really, because if you say you do, then are you counting those ballots right now? No, you're not. You don't know who actually is voting. There's obviously key indicators and whatever. But it's also, the other thing to add to that is really, you have to look back at COVID and know, I mean, the numbers are going up, not down. And so people are going to be inside. It's going to be colder. It's going to be whatever. So the next couple of months are going to be unlike anything we have ever seen in our lives. What happens? Saying that, I just want to throw one other thing out very quickly, which is my son manages buildings in downtown DC. They're boarded up now. They're boarding up now. Preparation for for Tuesday night as to what could happen. That's DC. And I don't know what other communities are doing across the country, but I think that people really do need to be careful. And that goes to the IFA. We started this conversation with that. I am on the board of the Integrity First for America, which is suing the Nazis and white nationalists supremacists who protested in Charlottesville. That court case will be heard in April. There is no question that the number of white supremacists and the militias and the issues that I think what we're going to be seeing in Michigan on Tuesday is a shanda. The notion that people can carry guns into election sites is really horrific. And one of the things we have to do is recognize that this has to change. And particularly with Joe Biden, we would have an administration that views white supremacy as an issue, anti-Semitism as an issue that is growing, and that the Justice Department and the FBI, who recognize that to be the fact, actually act on it.
Wow. Well, with that, unfortunately, I let it roll a little bit longer. This was fascinating. Susie, I think you have to come back next week and do a recap with us. We didn't even get into Joe, who's been following every week, said we didn't even talk about what happens with the Senate and if Mitch McConnell is no longer in charge. So with that,
Good things.
so with that, let's just keep holding our breath and planning what we're going to be drinking Tuesday night as we watch everything roll in. And everybody just be safe and healthy, and let's come back next week and see what happens. But thank you, Helen, thank you, Felissa, thank you, Susie, thank you all.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.